Alright guys, so behind me I got this 2007 H3 Hummer here. As you guys see, me and Des the Auto Tech had to push it in. It won't start. Pretty easy on this. No need to dive deep in diagnosis. It's a starter motor that needs to be replaced. When turning the key to the crank position, the starter just spins and the teeth on the starter will not slide out to engage the flywheel. So it looks like we're dealing with a mechanical problem on the starter. And so now the starter just gone dead on us completely and we need to get this thing out. So I decided to film this repair. I didn't see too many videos on YouTube about starter replacements on these H3 Hummers. They're similar to the Chevy Colorado starter replacements, but this one's a little more challenging. So it's a lot less space in the engine compartment to get to the starter. So these starters are pretty difficult to get to, and I'll show you that here in a minute. But if there's anybody out there needing to replace the starter on their H3 Hummer, take a look at this video, and I hope it helps you out. So let's get this thing going. Then disconnect the battery. It's interesting too that this is a GM and it doesn't have side posts, there's top posts. Alright, I'm going to raise this thing up so you guys can see where the starter is. It's in a pretty difficult location. Alright, so here we are underneath it. You can see your average starter will be somewhere in this location between the transmission and the engine block to engage the flywheel. But no, this one's way up there. Let's see if we can get a closer look at it. So on this Hummer, it's way up here. It's way up here. So there's really no way to get to it from the bottom. There's just too much stuff in the way. For starters on this, we're gonna pull this wheel off and likely pull the fender well off as well.
go grab some safety glasses. There's always a ton of crud that comes out of these. I got one more in there. Alright, now you can actually see where the starter is buried. Let me take you guys in there. Now that we got the inner fender well out, you can actually see where the starter is located now. You can see it's right here. And there's actually a starter bolt right here too. So it looks misleading, and it looks like you're able to remove the starter from this location. But you actually can't get the starter out where it is at this point. So in order to get the starter out, you actually have to take it from the top. And the purpose for removing the fender well is to actually access the intake manifold bolts that are along the bottom. So the starter actually needs to come from the top and not the bottom. You're not going to be able to get it out through the bottom on this Hummer. As you can see, there's fuel lines right here. That's preventing you from getting it out. There's also a dipstick tube here. We got an AC line right here. This is actually a AC line. If you follow it all the way around, you can see that that line comes all the way around and up here, which is a AC line. So none of these lines you really want to mess with. So that's really going to prevent you from being able to get this starter out from this way. So what I'm going to start doing now, while I got it like this, is I'm going to remove the S terminal wire. I'll remove the battery wire. And I can also see this is one starter bolt here. I'll remove that, and then from that point I'll start working on getting these lowered intake manifold bolts out, and then we'll lower it and get the top done. So let's get it done. Alright, so it looks like we could get this bolt here. So we'll go ahead and get that bolt and just get everything we can while we're down here. So let me grab something for that. All right, got one starter bolt.
Unfortunately, I'm not able to get the camera in there to show you guys exactly which bolts I'm hitting. But if you're doing this job and you're trying to get this intake manifold out or trying to get this starter out, let me at least show you, if I can, which bolts that I'm trying to hit.
So you can see that that's an intake manifold bolt there, right here, where I'm trying to get my socket on. So you can see these are the bolts that I'm going for. Unfortunately, it's too hard to get the camera in there because this is pretty much how it's going to look when you get in there.
Hit those lower intake manifold bolts. I'm going to use a long quarter with a swivel on it. Alright, we got one. Move on to the next. Two, three. Another one. Top. Once I get all these out and remove the intake, I'll show you guys exactly where every bolt is located. Once I get the intake all the way out. Alright, so we got all the bolts that we can get from the bottom. Time to move up top. Alright, now here we are up top. Let's start getting all this disassembled to get our intake out. another little fuel line bracket down here. Get that with a 10mm ratchet wrench. So if you're doing this job, just basically remove everything attached to the intake. And everything off. So you can pull it up and out. Alright, now let's get this alternator out the way. Get this AC line off of this bracket. Get this bolt here. Looks to be about a 15mm. Another 15mm bolt behind the bracket. Well, nope, one more. There's always one more. So that's a 15mm down there. It's always handy to have a quarter dry 15mm socket, so I could get in these tight spots with a little bit larger bolt. So 15mm deep on a quarter. Makes it a lot easier, especially when working on American vehicles. A lot of 13 and 15mm, and sometimes you need a quarter to get into those 15, to get to those tight spots that's holding a 15mm hole on it. Alright, so we got our bracket out. Alright, so that gives us access to these two alternator bolts. We'll unplug it while we're here. We'll unplug this cam sensor so we're not yanking on this wire on accident. I'm gonna leave it as is. Back to our alternator bolts. Alright, they're loose. I'm sure there's one at the bottom. Alright, so I'm going to loosen up the belt, serpentine belt. So I'm just going to take the belt just off the alternator. Try to leave it on everything else. Alright, so I can already wiggle the starter, so there's no bolt at the bottom. I assume it should be a bolt at the bottom, so maybe
maybe this alternator was replaced. Didn't put a bolt at the bottom. I don't know, but from past experience on doing these in the past, I do recall there being a bolt at the bottom. One out. Okay, so here's our alternator. Get this bolt out of our way. We do have to play a little bit of Tetris to get it out. Alright, so we got our alternator out. Okay, now with that alternator missing, you can see how we can get in here now and feel for the intake bolts and start loosening them up. So that's what you want to do. Once you get that alternator out, you got plenty of room to get under there with a 1/4 and a 10 millimeter, or it might be an 8 millimeter, and bust all those loose. But before we do that, we're just gonna go around and make sure we get everything off that's gonna be in our way. Alright, so obviously the intake's gotta come off. So we need to get the air cleaner off. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to get it off because the throttle body's attached. So let's detach all this stuff attached to the throttle body. What else we got here? Get this resonator box off. Alright, so we got our air box off. And we can see all 5 of our coils. Okay. Alright, so now we can actually take the intake off and slide it up without being attached. However, there is one PCV vent hose back here that will just pop up real quick. So we got that hose undone. So this is the fun part on doing these. Basically now you just want to reach in here and you could actually feel the intake bolts. Just run them down or run them out. Alright, so you want to find a decent length on it. You want an extension, probably like a 3-inch extension with a deep 10mm quarter. And if you got one of these ratchets with the rotating head on it and a quarter, you should use this one. So once you break the bolt free, you could just spin it all the way out by rotating the head, because you can't get two hands in there. Alright, so I only got really one bolt left. I just went ahead and went under and got them all. You see the intake is loose. Most of them, or the bottom ones at least, I got while the vehicle's up in the air, so it made it a lot easier. Once we get this intake out, I'll show you all the bolt locations. Alright, so that was the last bolt. Should be free and clear to pull this intake up and out. So we got it out. Here's how it looks, and let's get a close-up on the bolt locations. So these are the bolts. These are all the bolts that you're trying to get out. Here's a good close-up of all the bolts. So you can see the ones that I hit from the bottom while we were down, and then up top it was easier to get the ones up higher. So here's all the bolts. Alright, now with our intake gone, you can see where our starter is located at. Get a better look at it. And this is the way you want to pull the starter out. Avoid the trap of trying to pull it out from the bottom. You're going to end up breaking things. This is the way you want to get it out. So you can see now we got clear access to get to this top starter bolt right here. There's virtually no way to get to this bolt right here underneath. So I doubt if you can get it out from the bottom. Anyway, let's throw a 15mm socket on there and let's get our starter out. Alright, so let's get this bolt here. 15mm. Actually a nut. Okay, so let's get our nut off. Now we can get our starter out. Alright, so I got the starter out, and I just kind of wanted to show you guys what I meant earlier about when you turn the key, the motor spins, but the gears won't come out to contact the flywheel. So you can see is broken pretty bad. So there's definitely some mechanical damage with this starter. It just slides back and forth. So anyway, we got another starter coming. So we'll get that starter thrown in there and get this thing fired up. All right, so the new starter came in. Before I actually throw this thing in there, I'm gonna just test it, see if it works. Oh, this one ain't rattling around, so that's good. But let's jump this starter and see if it works before we put this thing in, because as you guys seen, it was a whole lot of trouble to get to this starter. So we want to make sure we put something working in. All right, so I got my terminals out. Let's go ahead and hook them up. Like I said, I just want to make sure this thing works before I put this starter back in there. It's a lot of trouble to get to this thing. The battery that I'm using is kind of weak, so I probably won't spin the starter as fast as a really good battery. All right, so it looks like it works. All right, so let's get it thrown back in the vehicle. Go and grab the other bolt, get that one started too. We'll put this bottom bolt in. Alright, let me run that down. Alright, so if you're doing this job, pretty much everything you can access from the top here. You don't necessarily have to take the S terminal and the battery cable off the starter from the bottom. I just did it because it was right there. So while it was there, I just went ahead and just removed it. But you could get all this stuff done from the top. Torque it down. Nice and snug. All right, put our cables on now. Our little tiny lock washer on there. you can see these starters are pretty difficult on these Hummers. I don't really run across them too often, but I've done a few of them before. In fact, I used to have an account with a catering company. Used to have an account with a catering company, and they had a bunch of Chevy Colorados. So I used to do a lot of starter and alternator replacements on these straight 5-cylinders. Quite a bit. Also, when I put my starters in, also check the factory terminal from the solenoid to the motor, and make sure that that's snugged up too. See, I'm glad I did. Those loose. So always snug up this connector here that comes from the factory or whoever rebuilt it. A lot of times this nut will be loose here, and so I usually snug these up, as well as all the other terminals. Alright, let's get our main battery cable on. Wash it on. Get our nut on. Alright, we got a nice tight connection on all of our terminals. So I'm happy with that. At this point, we can move on and start getting our intake manifold back on. So I got a cool little trick for you guys. If you're ever in a situation where you have to tear a lot down, just to be able to test a battery wire, such as the battery cable connected to the starter solenoid. Let's say you wanted to know if that had voltage, but there's no way you could actually get a test light on it with all the stuff in the way. Plug up a memory saver. A memory saver basically keeps battery voltage for you. So let me show you a little tip here. I'm going to show you a little trick. I'll plug this in, and we can test and see if that wire actually has battery voltage. This will serve as our battery basically while there's no battery here. So let me show you. Alright, so we got our memory saver here. We got it plugged into the diagnostic port. So let's turn it on. So we see it's on. Take our test light and let's hook it to a ground. As you can see, the test light up. Also, check your alternator cable. So we can test and see if our cables to the starter work without having a battery in there. Just use a memory saver to pretty much act as a battery, and you can pretty much do the same testing as you would with a battery. So I thought that was a neat little trick, just in case you're in a scenario where you can't put the battery in because the battery might be in the way for testing. You can just plug in a memory saver and this will act as your battery. All right, let's get that intake on. All right, so let me just wipe down the sealing surface on the cylinder head to make sure we don't get any grit and grime trapped in between the sealing surface and the gasket. I'm just gonna take a minute to just clean it up. All right, we got it all wiped down and cleaned up. Let's clean our intake gaskets off too. If you were doing this job yourself, it could be a good time to take your throttle body off, clean the backside of it, clean it out real good. Also, you could degrease the inside of the intake manifold after you get your throttle body off. Get you some degreaser and a water hose or a pressure washer. Blow this intake out and get all the crud out of it. I do stuff like that. I know not every technician does stuff like that, but I do it quite often. Service on this vehicle, I recommend it since the intake was off to replace the gaskets, clean the throttle body out, and degrease the intake manifold, but the customer declined, so they just want the starter replaced. So that's what we're gonna do. Okay, so we got all the crud off. We're gonna get this intake put back on, and what I like to do is just remember how many bolts I got so I know when I'm done. So I got, let's see, 9 bolts. So we got it pretty close to being in place. Now we'll just go through and just get bolts started one by one until we got all of them catching threads. And we'll snug them up. All right, I'm just gonna go for the easiest bolt first, just to get things lined up. Alright, got one thread started. Got 2 threads started. Remember, we got 9 bolts. Got 3 threads started. Four. The rest I'll have to get in like this. Well, we're getting them all. I know there's some way in the back. Yep, right here. Top and bottom. Got the top one. Got the bottom one. So that's 8 bolts I got started. So I know there's one more in here, probably in the middle somewhere that I probably skipped over. Yep, here it is. All right, so I got all 9 bolts threaded. So now I'm gonna go in and start snugging them up. All right, so I think I pretty much got it all torqued down. Just gonna go through and fill them real quick. Let's see here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay. So I got them all torqued down. I didn't film me torque every last single bolt. You guys didn't miss much. Just stuck my tongue out a little bit, said a few cuss words. Other than that, everything's all torqued back down. So at this point, we can go ahead and start hooking up everything back to our intake manifold. So let's start getting that hooked up. So we got a little bracket right here. I don't know if you guys can see that on the camera, but you can probably hear that. That's a little bracket. So let me go ahead and bolt up this bracket. Bolt in. There's 2 bolts on this bracket, and it bolts to the intake. I'll get the other side on. Ratcheting wrench. Snug. So that's snug. if you're doing this job, this bracket down here, I'll show you this real quick in case you're doing this job, but if you remove this bracket first, it's easier to get those bottom bolts when we had it up in the air, because you could sort of slide, that bracket sort of blocks some of the bolts. So let me show you here real quick. Bracket I put on this bolt here, and there's another bolt back here, and so this is a one-piece bracket here. So if you actually remove that bracket first, it'll actually make it easier for you to get to these bottom bolts when removing the intake. That's just a side point. All right, so we got another bolt right here to hold down our dipstick, our fuel line, and our evap line. So we'll get that buttoned up. Alright, so we got that held back in place. See, we got another little wiring harness. Got a wire harness here. I'm gonna push that into this little thing right here. Let's see what else. I think that's pretty much it as far as what bolts to the intake. The rest is, you know, getting our alternator back in, hooking up the electrical stuff. Now we can push this evap hose back in there. I'm gonna put a little bit of motor oil on here because there is O-rings in here. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of motor oil on the spout. Or I'll push this in. Got that on. Got a vent hose back here for the PCV. We'll go ahead and slip that on. Also, we'll plug up our throttle body connection. And also our map sensor. Alright, so we're moving right along. At this point, I'm gonna put the air box back on, and then we'll move down and get that alternator. All right, so let's get this air box on. Des Autotech is getting ready to pressure wash off some parts, or rear end rather. So if it's a little noisy, I apologize in advance, but gotta keep the train rolling. So now we can get our alternator back in. It is a tight fit. Alright, so we got it in. Get our bolt started. It is a tight fit, so you will have to play Tetris a little bit to get the alternator down and in. Alright, let's run these bolts down. Getting these starters in. Not the easiest starter to get done, to get to R&R. I'd say the worst starter I've ever replaced would probably have to be a Lexus LS 400. I believe that's the model, the V8 model Lexus, where they put the starter in the valley. You gotta remove like 2 intake manifolds. Basically gotta strip it down to just the cylinder heads. In order to get the starter out. So those suck. But I think those are just on the 90s models. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure, but I think it's just on the 90s models where they put the starter in the valley. Alright, got the alternator and all that stuff buttoned up. Let me just double check the torque on these bolts. That's nice and snug. And put my cam sensor back in. I just left it attached because for some reason the connector won't come out, and I didn't want to break it. Let me get some tape. Add a new piece of protector, wire protector. Plug back in. got our cam sensor back in. We can go ahead and hook up our fuel line. Put a little oil on this spout as well. Lock on. All right, it's coming along. What we need now is put our belt back on. All right, let's get our belt back on. All right, let's use a long 3/8 ratchet. Get our belt on. All right, got our belt on. Alright, so only thing left to do now is get our battery put in and let's fire it up. Almost forgot, we got one bracket to put on before we put our battery in. So let's get that on. Alright, now this AC line, both says bracket to hold it in place. Now let's get our battery in. right, got our battery hooked up. Now all we got to do is raise it up, get our inner fender well on, put our wheel back on, we're good to go. Get our inner fender cover in there and get this wheel back on. All right, we got our inner fender well on. Let's get our tire put on and get this thing back on the ground. Zap them down. It's a 3/8 drive impact, but this little thing's pretty strong. I'll put it on half power. All right, got our wheel on. All right, let's get it down and see if this thing starts.